This video is going to cover adding a Google login button to a Rails application. We're going to do this using Devise and the Omniauth gem for Devise. We'll also add in a couple of extra gems because the requirements for this have updated since the Rails 5 tutorial that I found. I'll have a link to that in the video description as well if you're interested in the source code that this is loosely based on. It's sort of pieced together from a couple different GitHub issues as well as a Medium article. So we're going to start by adding some gems to our gem file. So we're going to come over here to the gem file. I'm just going to scroll down to the bottom and I'm going to say this needs the gem for Devise. It needs a gem for Omniauth, and it needs a gem for Omniauth-Google-OAuth 2. And it's also going to need a gem that I'm trying to grab right now called Omniauth-Rails_CSRF_protection. It's got a weird name, but you need this one set to at least version 1.0 to fix another bug you might run into where when you try to log in, it'll give you a redirect failed, I think is what I was running into. But okay, we have that added. I'm going to go ahead and save this and I'll run a bundle install command to install those gems. After those are installed, we can then do a, let me full screen this. We can do a Rails G Devise :install command. And at this point you have two different options. I'm going to do this from the perspective of someone who would like to edit their user accounts and log in like they normally would with Devise. So I'm going to keep a couple extra features in here and I'm not going to remove everything that's suggested in the tutorial. So we're going to come into our initializers devise.rb and you're just going to find a place to put this. I'll put it right below the mail sender. And you're just going to say this needs a config.omniauth of Google OAuth 2. And then you're going to pass in two environment variables. One is the Google OAuth client ID and one is the Google OAuth client secret. Now you have a couple different options here. You could do it like this, or you could dig into your credentials. This is going to change based on where you're setting this, so that is something to be aware of. In this case, I'm going to leave it set to the env, and then I'm going to add in the credential dig into the developer environment, I think is how I did it. But for now, we don't actually need to do that. We need to hop into a user model. So I'm going to go ahead and generate a user model. I'll just say Rails G Devise user to create a user model. And then we can go ahead and exit out of this. I'm not going to run the database migrations yet because we're not done with it yet. We now need to come into our app, models, and our user.rb. And after the validatable, we're going to add in a couple more. We're going to add in a Omniauthable. We're going to give it an Omniauth providers of Google OAuth 2. Now in the article, it suggests just having these two, but by leaving the rest, we can create custom user accounts that we can then edit, which allows you to log in either through Google or through your Devise account. Now we need to come into our migration here because we need to add in a couple of extra details. So we'll just come up to the top and I guess below the encrypted password, we're going to want to add a couple extra fields for the full name from the user ID from Google, and the avatar URL. And you're also going to want to add a t.string for the provider. In case you're interested in adding in something like Twitter, this will allow you to get inside the callback, the provider, and then you can save it to the user. So then later on, you can do current user.provider to check if the user signed up through Google or through Twitter or whatever. Just allows you to do some custom logic. It doesn't hurt to have it, so we're just going to add it in and pretend we don't know any better. Once we're done with that, we can now run a Rails db:/migrate command to migrate the database. Looks good to me. Now we're going to want to set up some routes, so we'll just go ahead and we'll type routes, and we'll go into the config and routes.rb folder. Now, we should probably generate a controller. So let's do that real quick, actually. Let's say Rails G controller pages, and we'll give it a home page. Looks good. So So now we have that. Let's set that. There's an ant attacking me. Let's set that to be the root. The problem with living in the middle of the woods is bugs. So we set that to be the root. We can now change the Devise for users because we probably want to set this to redirect to some custom controllers. So I'm going to say controllers, and I'm going to open up some braces. And then in here, we're going to need the GitHub Copilot has the right idea. We're going to need the registrations controller and a sessions controller. But we're also going to want the Omniauth underscore callbacks to be users/Omniauth callbacks. That will be the callbacks controller, and you'll see what that means in a second here. So what we can do is we can pop on over to our console and we'll type Rails G, I think it's Devise controllers, and then you have to pass in who it's for. So here it's for the users. So we'll do that. Now it tells us to add in the controllers, which we already did. But now we can come up to the app controllers and we should have a users folder. And inside of that, we should have an Omniauth callbacks controller. Now we want to start off in the sessions controller because remember we added the Omniauth, the registrations, and the sessions. So we're probably going to have to do something in each of these to override something. But we're going to come in here and we're just going to add in 2 quick methods. I'm going to grab these and copy paste them so that hopefully we can save some time. First one's going to be the after sign out path 4, and then it's going to be a resource or scope. And it's just going to take you to the new user session path. So after you sign out, you go there. Then you're going to have one for the after sign in path, which is just going to take you to the resource or scope. And if that doesn't exist, it'll take you to the root path. So that's basically it for the sessions controller. This is probably one of the easier ones to implement. We can now take this and close it. I'm actually going to Control W all of these just to clean up my tabs a little bit. I'll click on app controllers users again so that we can go into the next controller. For this one, we're going to want to come into the Omniauth controller. And there's a little bit of logic in here that we have to do. We're going to start by creating a Google OAuth controller action. So right here, it tells you that you should do something similar with Twitter. So instead, we're going to do the Google OAuth one for this tutorial. After we do that, we then want to grab the user from a user.fromOmniauth method. And of course, that doesn't exist yet. So we have to come into the user.rb. This is going to be another instance where we sort of deviate from what the tutorial said. So we're going to start with a def self from Omniauth. And then in here, this is based on another GitHub issue that I found. We're going to start by grabbing the user by their provider. So we'll say where the provider is the auth.provider. Remember, this is coming from here. So let me actually take this and move it down here so we can look at both. So we grab the Google OAuth 2. It grabs the user from Omniauth. And the Omniauth auth object, this right here, is actually just a method that we're going to create. And I can grab this and throw it down here because I think it's in the private. So we'll say private. And then we'll add in the @auth. Basically what we're doing is we're just grabbing the information from the request. And this is going to have a couple pieces of information. It's going to have the user ID, the email, the full name, and the avatar URL. Those are all things we made in the database earlier. So it's going to have all of these. It's also going to contain the provider and of course the email. So this right here is just going to grab all of the user information. It's then going to be passed into the user as this auth right here. And then inside of this user where we're doing a where find, we're then saying grab the user by the provider, which in this case, it's going to return like Google 2 or Google underscore OAuth 2, whatever this is. So we're looking for a user where this is the OAuth. And then we're looking for the user ID, which is, of course, returned from the OAuth provider, which is Google in this case. So if we find one, we want to use it. If we don't find one, we want to create it. Then we want to say, okay, the user has an email. So if we have to create it, then we need to say the user.email is equal to auth.info.email. Then we need to check the password, which is going to be a user.password, and then it's going to be Devise friendly token 0 to 20. We can then grab the user's full name, which we set earlier. Remember, this is inside of our migration. And then we can grab the user's avatar URL. And then down here, I'll add in this comment just because it might be helpful in the future. If you're using confirmable in the providers, you use validate emails and comment the line below to skip the confirmation email. So if you want to do that, this is an option. I'm going to leave it commented out. And then we can come back over to the Omniauth callbacks controller because we're now done with this method. So this is going to return a user or create it. Then we're going to check if the user is present. So we'll say if user is present. Of course, we need an else and an end. And then if the user is present, we want to sign out from all scopes. We'll then display a flash message saying a success, callback success from Google. And then we're going to do a sign in and redirect for the user with an event of authentication. So if this happens, then we're good to go. We're able to log in. Everything's fine. If this doesn't happen, then we need to flash an alert. The alert here is going to be actually what this is suggesting. So it's going to be a devise.omniauth callbacks failure for Google with a reason of user not found, except the code I have has a better reason, which is auth.info.email is not authorized. And then after we do that, we then just want to redirect to the new user session path. Now, at this point, I believe we're done with the actual Rails code of this tutorial. It's now going to be a bit of a gross slog as I have to full screen this because I don't even remember what the steps are. We need to head over to the console.cloud.google.com because we need to create an app for our development purposes. So you're going to come over here. I'm going to zoom in a bit. And you're going to come over to the cloud platform right next to it. As of this recording, you can see I have a whole bunch of different apps with IDs here, including one for when I was still in school. We're going to click New Project. It's going to warn me that I don't have a million projects that I can use. That's fine. I don't care. I'm going to name this, I don't know, Omniauth tutorial. The name doesn't really matter. I'm going to click Create. And now that we've created it, I think there's two steps we need to do. The first is we need to click on the credentials. We also need to make sure we're on the right project. So up here, it doesn't change after you create it. So let's go to Omniauth tutorial to change it. And now we'll see that I don't have a client IDs here. So I think what we need to do is click create credentials. We need to do a OAuth client ID. Yeah, we need to configure our consent screen. Sure. This is, I think we're going to go with the external because I actually can't even click the internal. So the external is going to start in test mode. And then later on, when you want to change it to production, you just have to verify your application. Of course, we're not doing that here. So just click external and it'll just work with a test user. So we can click create. We now need to give this a name. I'll call this Omniauth tutorial for the app name. And I'll set my own email as the support email. And then I'll close this help panel over here because I feel like it's spamming me. Once that's done, we also need a support email down here for the developer contact. And I think at this point it should be good. So let's click save and continue. Okay, and now we need to save and continue. It's going to say add users for the test user. I'm just going to add my email. I don't know if this is necessary or not, but I'll click add anyways. And now I have that, so I can click save and continue. Okay, so I guess I can't be a test user. That's fine. Let's go over to our credentials and let's create this OAuth 2.0 client credentials. So I'll click on create credentials, OAuth client ID. The application type will be a web app. The name will be Omniauth tutorial. And we need to add in a authorized redirect URIs. And for this, I think it's going to be something like http://localhost port 3000 /users/auth/google_OAuth2/callback. Click add URI. That's good to go. This one doesn't need to exist. So we'll click create. Now it's going to give us a client ID and a client secret. So let's go add those. Now this part is actually pretty simple. We're just going to come over to our, where is it? Config, our initializers, our devise.rb. And in here, we call this one Google OAuth Client ID and this one Google OAuth Client Secret. So I just need that as a point of reference. So we come over to our console. We're going to type editor equals and then quotes, code space dash dash wait, end quotes, space, and then it's going to be Rails credentials colon edit. And I'm going to exit out a full screen here. And I'm going to hit enter. And this should open it up in VS Code. Now that we're in here, we're just going to grab these 2 bits right here. This first one, put in a colon, and then we need the client secret. So we'll grab the client ID, copy it, we'll paste it over here. Don't use mine, use your own, obviously. We'll grab the client secret, paste it in, and now you'll hit Control S, but it won't actually save until you close the file. As soon as you close it, it will then say file encrypted and saved. Now at this point, you can either grab the credentials right here, or you can set them up in the environments development.rb. It really doesn't matter. I just did it like this while I was testing it. So unfortunately, I'm going to just follow my notes here. So I'm going to come over to the, what was it? Development.rb, and I'm going to full screen this on my other screen. So basically in the development.rb, we're going to come up to the top and we're just going to grab these. So we're going to say this is the Google OAuth client ID, which is equal to the Rails application credentials dig. You can also just grab this and paste this in here and do something like this. So maybe we'll do it like this. I guess I'll do it properly. That's fine too. I'm going to grab the other one and I'm going to replace it right here inside of the devise.rb. And I'm going to come over to development and I'm going to get rid of this line so that we don't have as much spaghetti code. So I'll save development.rb. I'll save the devise.rb and my formatter will do what it wants to. Maybe I'll do it like this instead. Okay, so that seems fine. It apparently doesn't like using dig here, but I really don't care what the style cares about right here. So let's come over and let's run a Rails S to start the server. And then we'll come over here and refresh the page. So let me create the login and the logout links first. So to do this, we need to come over to the home page. So I'm going to hit Control P, type home, hit enter, and now I'm on the home page. So on the home page, we need to do a check if we are the current user. Otherwise, we're not logged in. And then if we're not logged in, then we hit end right there. So we'll start by checking what the current user's email is, just so that we can test this. We'll then have a link to the edit account, which is just standard Devise stuff. This is, of course, if we're logged in. And then we'll have a link to the logout, which is more standard Devise stuff, destroy user session path. We do throw in the turbo false because, of course, turbo has its own special stuff that it needs for some reason. And then we add in the method delete because we need to have like 18 different lines here. I don't actually know if this is necessary, but that's just what I have. We then check if we're not logged in, we create a link to the new user session path. And then we also have a link to the create account, which is just the new user registration path. And the only one here that's a bit special is the logout button because it can't be a link because it's not a GET request, yada, yada, yada. So once we have that, we can come over here and refresh. We'll click login and you'll already see that we have a button here. So this is created by one of the things that we installed. It could be the Omniauth gem that we added, but I'd actually like to replace this with an image. So what I'm going to do is stop this and I'm going to say, let's do a Rails G devise :views command to generate the Devise views. And then we're going to come over to Google and we're going to search for Google login icon. And we're going to find a link. I think it's this one, the sign-in branding guidelines. They're going to have a whole bunch of their stuff here. You can click download files. That's going to give you a zip file. If you open up the zip file, I can zoom in here. You'll see that there's a web folder. We'll click on 1x and it'll have a whole bunch of icons here or images. We're then going to come up to app, assets, images. And we're just going to throw these into the images folder for now. You're, of course, free to move these wherever you'd like. Once they're in here, we can then grab the, I don't know, I think it's like the normal one that I just went with. Sign in light normal, this one. I'm going to hit F2 on this, Control A, Control C to just copy the name. And then we can full screen this. We then need to come into the Devise shared links. And at the bottom here, this is where it's adding in the sign in button. What we're going to do instead is we're going to come into this loop here. We're going to do a form for, and we'll just call this login. This name doesn't matter. We're then going to give it a URL. The URL is going to be Omniauth authorized path with a resource name and a provider. We're then going to say comma. The method needs to be post, and the data needs to be turbo : false. And then close the braces, do F, and then come down here, and then we need to, of course, end this and tab it all over. Now that that's done, we can do a link to, and we'll just say this is, I don't know, login. And instead of this path right here, we don't need this anymore. We're just going to say this is a type of image. And then it's going to be a src URL for, and I think what I had here was like /assets/ and then the image name that we copied from up here inside of our images folder. Now we don't need this method post at the end here. And I actually don't know if we need the BR. We'll just get rid of the BR for now. And we'll save this, come over here and refresh the app. We should probably start it first. Let's type Rails S and then I'll refresh. So it's rendering the text, but it's not rendering the image for some reason because this needs to be a f.submit instead. So let me do that. Come over here and refresh. And now we have the login button. So we can, of course, come up here. Well, I guess. So now that we've done that, we can hopefully click on sign in with Google. It takes us to an invalid request with a missing parameter. I'm assuming we need to open up our credentials again. So we're just going to type this command, editor equals code -- wait, Rails credentials edit. And we probably need to make these lowercase if I had to guess. So let me just come down here. Google _OAuth _client _ID. And then we'll just grab this same thing, but do secret right here. And then we'll just copy these and paste them and then get rid of these. So we'll save that, close this, exit full screen, run a Rails S. We'll come back to localhost port 3000, click sign in with Google. Takes us to a link with all of my different accounts, including one that I use for RuneScape. Please don't hack me. I'm going to use the dhartdean@gmail.com account, and it takes me to the sign in or to the homepage. All right, one quick note. I just went to edit the account and it wasn't working, so I got into a whole thing about the current best practices for how to do this. Currently with edit account, as far as I can tell, if you're using Omniauth, you want to do a check. If you're using a regular account, you enter your current password. If you're working through Omniauth, you just use your password and password confirmation to set it, and you don't need your current password. I'm not really sure how I feel about that, so maybe I would suggest doing like a Boolean to check if you've set your password before, and if you haven't, skip the password confirmation, and if you have, then use it. And it looks like if you don't know your password because you signed up through Google Auth, then you do a forgot my password thing in the sign-in form. But if you want to skip the actual password confirmation, I have the snippet for you. You're going to come into your registrations controller, and right below the delete, you're going to put in this chunk of code right here. And you can see this is going to do sort of what we do down here with the user update password that I was testing out a minute ago. Basically what you're going to do is set the resource.provider equal to, if it's equal to Google OAuth 2, then you delete the current password parameter. And because this resource.update without password call that we're doing here, if we come over into the Devise source, you can come to the update without password. It actually deletes the parameters for your password and password confirmation, so that's no good. So instead what we do is we just set the resource.password before we pass it in. It then still cleans up the parameters, but we are able to just do the update. It changes the password because we changed it right here. It calls save, and then we're good. If you signed up regularly, we just call resource update with password like a normal person, and you're totally fine. So my only suggestion here is after you do this update without password, you would then want to do something like, or maybe even in here, do something like resource dot update attribute, or maybe you could do something like resource dot I've been updated equals true. And then at that point, you would then do a regular current password check. So you'd say I've been updated equals true. And then maybe you go back to checking the current password or something. I don't know. So that's just something to consider because this seems a little bit sloppy, in my opinion, to just skip the current password every time. I feel like there's a way to code around that. Now, one other thing we can take a look at real quick is if we come into our home page, we'll just say pages home, and we full screen this. I think we have a user avatar, so we can do a image tag with the current underscore user dot avatar underscore URL, I think is what it was called. We'll hit Control S on that, refresh the page, and there is my Gmail avatar. So I think that's gonna do it for this tutorial. Hopefully this was helpful. Hopefully this answers some questions, because I realized it has changed a little bit since Rails 5, which is what I was referencing for this. So hopefully this was helpful. And if it was, hopefully I'll see you in the next video. Have a good day.